Good morning, guys. I hope everybody's doing well. We're gonna hit the ground running this morning. I got 5 pages of notes, so we're gonna be moving quick. In 7 verses we're covering. So 5 pages, 7 verses. Let's go ahead and pray, and then we'll start. Lord, thank you so much just for, again, your word. Your word is dense in information, dense in history, culture, language, and all of it is centered around your desire, your history, your philosophy, all of it. I pray, God, that this would be beneficial and that this time, Lord, would be used well to understand what this book has with clarity. And thank you again so much for Daniel and for just what this book tells us about you and your overall plan for your people. We love you so much. For it's in your son's name. Amen. Okay, so here we go. Chapter 1, part 1 of the book of Daniel. Throughout this discourse, we will be going back to some of the previous introductory information. We'll be adding a lot of things here. Hopefully, again, to give some clarity as to some of the details of what Daniel has for us. All right, let's go ahead and open up. Here we go. Let's go ahead and open up the curtain here. Starting with Daniel, chapter 1, verses 1 and 2. In the 3rd year of the reign of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, that's where we stop. Let's talk a little bit about this information here. The book of Daniel begins with a prologue, okay? This prologue is a historical marker, okay? This historical marker tells us a little bit of information with this particular statement that begins here. 1, it records the name of a king that ruled over a particular tribe and region. That is Jehoiakim, right? And of course, it recorded again the particular tribe that Jehoiakim ruled over. That is Judah, right? Or region, whichever you like. And it recorded the years of Jehoiakim's reign in Judah, 3 years. So in the 3rd year of this individual's reign, he ruled over Judah. But it doesn't stop there. Hey, remember when I told you that I have the right, I reserve the right to ask questions that were not part of my original, the 3rd particular presentation? We will come to our first new question. Who is this guy? Who is he? Have you ever read a passage and you see all these names and you just kind of skip them, right? We can't do that here, right? We have to examine this. So let's do a brief case study, a small case study of Jehoiakim, okay? I will have verses. If you guys have notes, you guys know the cross references. So if you guys don't, you can write these down, because I'm not going to go through these. All right, so Jehoiakim is the son of Josiah. Josiah was also a king of Judah. We see this in 1 Chronicles, 2 Chronicles, and Jeremiah, verses 1 to 3, respectively. Okay. Jehoiakim was the 3rd ruler of Judah, okay, before he was captured and taken into Babylon. The 2nd ruler to succeed his father was his older brother Joaz, okay, which is short for Jehoahaz. We see this again in 2 Chronicles chapter 36, verses 1 to 2. This is one of the cross references here. When the people of the land took Jehoahaz, the son of Josiah, and made him king in the place of his father in Jerusalem, Jehoahaz was 23 years old when he became king, and he reigned 3 months in Jerusalem. So Josiah is the 1st ruler, Joaz was the 2nd, and Jehoiakim is the 3rd ruler. Okay. The 2nd ruler was taken by Egypt's Pharaoh, Necho, okay? And he was imprisoned. The Lord raised up the Egyptian Pharaoh, Necho, to imprison Joash, okay? Well, why did he do that? Well, within this particular historical narrative, there is a particular statement that is used as to why God would seize a king using a Gentile ruler and imprison them. And that is the phrase, he did evil in the sight of the Lord. This seemed to always be the case. This evil was against the law of Moses as to how they were to relate to God and one another as a nation, which was expressed by the following. So the evil that they did was expressed in three particular ways, and they're all interrelated. One, again, was idolatry, the worshiping or acknowledging false deities, right? The second one was immoral conduct, and the third one was again, violent activity. Of course, when you have an idol, that idol carries with it particular rules and guidelines and stipulations. Those stipulations and those laws were against the law of Moses. And as a result, these kings represented the entire nation. When the kings would allow this to happen, so goes the people, right? And so the Lord would raise up other rulers, particularly from other nations, to seize the kings and imprison them. After Pharaoh Necho imprisoned Joash, that is the second ruler in Egypt, Necho installed Eliakim as king, and Necho changed his name, this is fascinating, to Jehoiakim, which means the Lord raises up. What a phrase, right? So the Egyptian king takes Joash, imprisons him, installs Eliakim, and changes his name to Jehoiakim. At the same time, Necho fines Israel 100 talents of silver and 1 talent of gold. We see this in 2 Chronicles chapter 36, verses 3 to 4. It says, then the king of Egypt disposed him at Jerusalem and imposed on the land a fine of 100 talents of silver and 1 talent of gold. The king of Egypt made Eliakim, his brother, king over Judah and Jerusalem, and changed his name to Jehoiakim. But Necho took Joash, his brother, and brought him to Egypt. Okay. So how much is 100 talents of silver and a talent of gold? Well, in today's dollars, if you were to take it and do the math, right, 100 talents of silver is over $3 million in today's currency, and 1 talent of gold is just a roughly almost 3 million. So $6 million over is what Egypt fined the land of Judah, okay? Which is that's pretty amazing to think about. So looking at the timeline of Daniel, where we're at right now, looking at the text, Jehoiakim begins his reign in Judah, with the capital being Jerusalem, in 608 BC. Okay, 6th century, 608 BC. Okay, that's when he begins his reign. Jehoiakim was 25 when he ruled over Judah and governed for 11 years in Jerusalem. Okay. It is recorded in 2 Chronicles that just as his brother and his father before him, Jehoiakim did evil in the sight of the Lord, just like we mentioned previously. Now, Jerusalem and Judah were not destroyed instantly. As a matter of fact, in Chronicles listed, there were two more rulers at this point after Jehoiakim is taken. Okay. There was Jehoiakim, which is Jehoiakim and Zedekiah. Okay. Jehoiakim and Zedekiah did the same thing as Jehoiakim did. They did evil in the sight of the Lord. The Lord raised up Nebuchadnezzar and dispossessed them and imprisoned them. Zedekiah was the worst of them. He was the worst of all of them. He was the one that got his eyes gouged out and was taken into Babylon. So we find that Jehoiakim is the first of three who will be taken in and raided and dispossessed. Let's continue here. Daniel chapter 1, verses 1 to 2. Again, in the third year of the reign of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came to Jerusalem and besieged it. And the Lord gave Jehoiakim, king of Judah, into his hand with a part of the vessels of the house of God. In this event, King Nebuchadnezzar coming into Jerusalem is also recorded in other books of the Hebrew scriptures. This also records Nebuchadnezzar's activity. For example, in 2 Chronicles chapter 3, verses 5 to 8, it says this: Jehoiakim was 25 years old when he became king, and he reigned 11 years in Jerusalem, and he did evil in the sight of the Lord. Then Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came up against him and bound him with bronze chains to take him to Babylon. Nebuchadnezzar also brought some of the articles of the house of the Lord to Babylon and put them in his temple. This is actually kind of important because when you seized a land, you took their king and you took their spoils. And in this case, you conquered their God also. So Nebuchadnezzar comes into Jerusalem, takes the king, and takes some of the effects from the temple and brings them to Babylon as an example that he has taken over basically the king of Israel. He has conquered them, right? Along with his gods. That's what you did in this culture. Okay? At this time period, when you ruled over a land, you took their gods, your gods became their gods. That's what you did. This is why you have all of these different gods with all these different names and things like that, because when the conquering ruler went into a territory and conquered the land, well, their gods were also conquered by the gods who conquered the land and things like that. So we read in Daniel, in the third year of the reign of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, King Nebuchadnezzar invades Judah and Jerusalem, takes Jehoiakim, Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah to Babylon. He captures the king, he captures the people, he takes the effects from the temple, or at least some of them, and he carries them to Babylon. Okay? This occurred in 605 BC. Why do we know that? Because in the third year of the reign of King Jehoiakim, he was taken and seized and brought to Babylon, along with Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. Jehoiakim, again, he's in 3 years into his reign, and Daniel, it would seem, could be at this time 16 years of age. Okay. Now, let's continue. Daniel chapter 1, verse 2 and following. It says, the Lord gave Jehoiakim, king of Judah, into his hand, along with some of the vessels of the house of God, and he brought them into the land of Shinar, to the house of his God. And he brought the vessels into the treasury of his God. Again, as I mentioned before, whenever you conquer a land, those gods now belong to you, right? And you get to change their mythology. You get to change their history. You get to change who they are. You get to change their sex, right? You get to add things to their story, right? So King Nebuchadnezzar took, it says all the effects, but not really. He took all the effects of the temple of God and placed them in the house of his gods. That Hebrew word is Elohim. Okay. Again, Elohim is frequently used in various places, not just for the Lord God of Israel, but also for the different gods that were represented in these particular nations. It's a general word. Now, remember this: the house of their God, that is the treasury of their God in Babylon, was more than likely the Etemenaki. You remember the Etemenaki, right? If you don't, I will show you a picture that relates to one of the previous lessons that I taught about the history and culture of Babylon. Remember, the Etemenaki was a place where possibly all the gods of Babylon were recognized, right? Remember, Marduk was one of the gods who was recognized as the highest god of Babylon. So I could suspect that when Nebuchadnezzar was raised and invaded Jerusalem, they gave praise to Marduk, right? That he conquered Judah and Jerusalem. This Marduk's temple was more than likely the one at the very top, which is why, again, the temple of Elohim, their gods are mentioned here. The Etemenaki was found at the center of the city of Babylon, okay? And that's where their central worship and things took place there. Okay? Verse 3. Let's continue here. Then the king ordered Ashpenaz, the chief of his officials, to bring in some of the sons of Israel, including some of the royal family and of the nobles. We got to look at some words here. Officials, royal family, and nobles. So the king orders Ashpenaz, the chief of all of his officials, the one who rules over these individuals, to bring in some of the sons of Israel and royal family and nobles. Let's take a look here. The Hebrew word for officials is the word saris. We've looked at this word before. This word occurs 42 times in the Hebrew scriptures, 7 times in the book of Daniel. The word literally means, it could be translated official, but it literally comes from the word eunuch. This word is also found in the book of Esther. Okay? It comes from the Hebrew word meaning to castrate. So I don't know why they would translate it as official. They should just translate it as eunuch, because that's essentially what it is, right? So the Ashpenaz, and by the way, that was very common, as we mentioned in the historical cultural lecture, that eunuchs work alongside of the rulers and the kings and things like that. Okay? And they were more likely eunuchs because they were either sold into service of the king, or it was a punishment as a result of them violating said law or something like that, or they had given their life willingly to the service of the king at the time. Okay? What about this? Royal. The Hebrew word here is maluka. Occurs 24 times in the Hebrew text. It appears 1 time, which is here, in the book of Daniel. It is translated kingdom, royal, or king. So we see these are individuals who have particular prominence and authority. This is from the passive participle Hebrew word malak, meaning to rule. Okay? So this talks about the state or the position of a particular person. Okay? And of course, we have the word family. Family is the Hebrew word zerah. This word occurs 229 times in the Hebrew scriptures and twice in the book of Daniel. It's translated family here, but you can also translate this as seed or offspring, the natural offspring of an individual. So you put these two together, Maluka Zerah, you find that this royal family, or this family that has kingly line, is more probably discussing Nebuchadnezzar's seed or his offspring. Okay. Again, when you have a king, you have more than one wife, right? And they will have a progeny of children. That firstborn usually takes on the family line. As a matter of fact, we saw some of this in the book of Esther when Haman threw a temper tantrum, and all of his individuals around him told him about the seed that he had, right? The descendants, right? And that was to be somewhat of a flex, right? For Haman when he got upset. So this is more likely probably discussing King Nebuchadnezzar's line or his offspring. Then we have the nobles. This is the Hebrew word partam. This occurs 3 times in the Hebrew scriptures, 1 time in the book of Daniel, and it is translated as one who it has nobility or a prince. Okay. Now, princes during this time, they were not kings, although they did have high rank and authority and status in the state of Babylon. Okay. So you have those who were part of the royal family or the family line, those who were offspring of King Nebuchadnezzar. You had those who had lots of responsibility, perhaps governors or the sons of governors or things like that. And you had the sons of Israel, 3 distinct groups. Some of the royal seed or descendants, noblemen, and Ben Yisrael, the sons of Israel. This is important again because King Nebuchadnezzar is looking for individuals who could serve on the king's court, the creme de la creme, the best of the best of the best individuals. The best from his family line, the best from the noblemen, and the best from the sons of Israel. Again, when you conquer a people, those people belong to you, right? They belong to you. And so he brings those who were not part of the Babylonians also into the circle for his service. In verse 4, we are treated to some of the details and the descriptions of what these individuals were to have. Let's read. They were to be youths in whom was no defect, who were good looking, showing intelligence in every branch of wisdom, endowed with understanding and discerning of knowledge, and who had the ability for serving in the king's court. And he ordered them to teach the literature and language of the Chaldeans. So King Nebuchadnezzar gives more details. Let's look at some of these words in red here concerning what he was looking for. The first thing was that they had to be youths. The Hebrew word is yaled here. 90 times it occurs in the Hebrew scriptures, this word. This word also occurs 5 times in the book of Daniel. This word could be translated as youth, but also child. I would believe young men would possibly be more clearer, right? Because he's not just looking for any youths, but particular ones, young men, right? They were not to be of middle age or older age. They were to be within the vitality of youth, in their prime, so to speak. Okay? How about with no defect? What does this mean? What is this Hebrew word? The Hebrew word is mum, okay? Not mu or moon, okay? Mum, okay? 22 times this word occurs in the Hebrew scriptures, 2 times in the book of Daniel. Without blemish or defect, this word here, okay? So in the context here, it's not talking about necessarily one who's ill, who has like the cold or something like that, or someone who has leprosy. Not that, but someone who has some physical defect. They can't be tarnished in any way, right? So no physical disabilities, no intellectual disabilities, right? They have to be without defect, right? So again, he's looking for the prime goods here. Good looking. I put this as a question mark because I don't know if that's what he's talking about. Okay. The Hebrew word for this is the word tov. We're familiar with this word, especially within the book of Ecclesiastes. Let's talk about the quality or the substance of a thing. This word again occurs 565 times in the Hebrew scriptures. It only occurs twice in the book of Daniel. So it's not used very frequently here in this book. It is an adjective, a descriptor, okay? And it's translated as good, pleasant, or agreeable. I'm going to respectfully disagree with this translation. I don't believe that it's talking about their physical features, but I think it's talking about their overall quality of their physical health. Why would I say this? Because in Daniel chapter 1, I believe it's verse 15, not verse 5, but 15, this word also occurs. And it's not talking about their looks. This is within the context of them eating vegetables and drinking water. Okay? It says this, at the end of the 10 days, their appearance seemed better and they were fatter. We'll talk about that word. We'll talk about that when we get there. Okay. Then all of the youths or the young men who had been eating the king's choice food. I believe that this is talking about their physical appearance. Okay. It doesn't mean, now they might have been strapping, that's fine. But I don't think it's talking about that. It seems as if in the context of this statement, the Hebrew word tov is translated better. And then this has to do with the health. They didn't look sickly. You know what I'm saying? They didn't look weak. You know, they were healthy. They were strong men, right? So I would say that it's not talking about their physical appearance more than it is that they're talking about their physical fitness, the physical features. Okay, literature. So remember in verse 4 that they would understand, showing intelligence, every branch of wisdom, with understanding, discerning knowledge, who had ability for serving in the king's court, in order then to teach them the literature. This word is sefer. Again, 188 times it occurs in the Hebrew text, 5 times in the book of Daniel. This word means book or scroll. Okay. Obviously, if they're going to be involved in the king's court, they need to know the language and the history of the culture, particularly those who were part of Israel, the sons of Israel. They need to learn this, right? And so this discusses the laws and the customs of the history of the Babylonian Empire. Who were the kings? What would they be doing? How would they be conducting themselves? What is the culture? What is the history? And they would have to learn the language of that culture. Because again, when you rule over a people, you assimilate into their culture. That's what you do. You learn the mythology. You learn what these deities are, right? And what they do and their history. So putting this all together, King Nebuchadnezzar gave the qualifications for these groups who are the best of the best. Young men, healthy men, insightful. They were able to understand things and comprehend things, and they could learn quickly. They were learned men, and they would attend to the king. These individuals were to learn the ways and customs and laws and language of Babylon, to serve the king directly. Okay. Verse 6. Now the historical narrative goes, if you see, we're working from the general to the specific, right? We see this, right? That now we have 3 groups, and now we're going to focus on 4 people in verse 6, particularly from the sons of Israel. Verse 6. Verse 5. The king appointed for them a daily ration from the king's choice food and from the wine which ye drink, and appointed that they should be educated 3 years, and at the end of which they were to enter the king's personal service. Now among them were from the sons of Judah. They were Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. It is recorded out of all of those individuals from the sons of Israel, there were 4 that were the best of the best. Okay? Let's focus on their names for a minute. This is fascinating to me. Okay? Let's focus on Daniel for a minute. The Hebrew word for Daniel is Daniel. Daniel. Okay? This name comes from 2 Hebrew words. El, which is God in the singular form, and Dan, which is judge, which means God is my judge, my righteous judge, right? Again, names were given, particularly in the Hebrew culture, as a reminder of the attributes and nature of God, right, in his activity. Daniel's name was changed to Belshazzar. Now, why would Daniel's name be changed to Belshazzar? Because when you conquer a people, you conquer their God. Therefore, when they become part of the king's service, you change their name. Belshazzar is basically Aramaic in origin and comes from 2 words, Bel, which is Lord, and Chazar, which is to protect the king. Okay. Bel, if you remember from our historical presentation, Bel is associated with the god Marduk. Okay. So Daniel gets the name of the highest god, right? May Marduk protect the king. Okay. Which again is fascinating, because if we go through the when we go through the narrative of Daniel, what does Daniel do? He becomes a personal protector of the king. Fascinating. Okay. Hananiah, let's talk about him. Hananiah is the Hebrew word here. This Hebrew word, or this Hebrew name, comes from 2 words. Yah, which is a shortened form of Yahweh, or Lord, all caps, right? Yahweh. Okay. And Hanan, which is favored or merciful. So his name means either God has been merciful, God has been gracious, things like that. What a name, right? Again, these names invoke the remembrance of God and his attributes. Hananiah's name is changed to Shadrach. Okay. This is also Babylonian or Aramaic in origin, and his name may reflect the Babylonian god Misa-Aku, which is the moon god. Okay. So he works for King Nebuchadnezzar in the name of the moon god Aku. Now, we did not talk about Aku. Okay. So that brings up a new question. Who is Aku? Aku is a false deity of the Babylonians, and not much known is known about him other than he is the moon god. Okay. However, it would appear that he was pretty influential in previous times because Aku's name may be observed in the book of Genesis. Okay. In Genesis chapter 14, verse 1, we read the following about 4 kings that Abraham had to contend with. It says this, and it came about in the days of Aramephel, king of Shinar, Arioch, king of Elasar, Kedolamer, king of Elam, and Tidal, king of Goyim. I wish I could spend more time on this, but we can't do it. We gotta kick them and keep moving, right? Arioch, this name occurs twice in the Hebrew scriptures. This name, translated, may equate to the phrase lion-like. Remember, Will, you brought this up, right? Every king seems to think the best of themselves, right? So they name themselves just the best of themselves, right? Lion-like, due to his position as the king. This was his name in Hebrew. However, this name found in Genesis was probably spoken in Akkadian, okay? We will talk about Akkadian when we get to chapter 2. Fascinating. His name in this language is the name Eri-Aku, or the servant of Aku. Ironically, this is the same name that's used for the guard in chapter 2, Arioch. Man, I wish I had like 30 more minutes. Give me 30 more minutes, Will. All right? Arioch is found in Daniel chapter 2. Again, it would appear that the names that were given to those who dwelt in Babylon, or at least within the king's court, were to give honor and homage to the Babylonian gods. So every individual that worked within the king's court possibly had a name that was associated with one of the gods of Babylon. Okay? We see this in Daniel chapter 2, verses 13 and 14. So the decree went forth that the wise men should be slain, and they looked for Daniel and his friends to kill them. Then Daniel replied with discretion and discernment to Arioch. Okay? Again, this is part of the Aramaic section of Daniel. We'll get to that in a couple of weeks. The captain of the king's bodyguard, who had gone forth to slay the wise men of Babylon because they could not interpret or give the dream of Nebuchadnezzar. Okay? Even the name Nebuchadnezzar has ties to false deities. For example, back to verse 1. In the 3rd year of the reign of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came to Jerusalem and besieged it. This Hebrew word, Nebuchadnezzar, this was the name written in Hebrew that Daniel gave in his account here. But in Babylon, before Daniel, it was probably written in a cuneiform language. Again, we'll talk about all this in chapter. I'm throwing all this out of here. All right. So if you're confused, don't worry. It's all going to become clear, but you're going to have to wait a couple of weeks, or you can study it yourself. Okay? It was written in cuneiform. Nebuchadnezzar's name means, may Nebo protect the crown. Nebo is another name for the scribe who worked under the false god Marduk. So Nebo is the scribe for Marduk, who is Bel, or Lord, or the God, right? Whew. Let's keep moving here. Mishael is the Hebrew word here. This Hebrew name comes from two words, El and Me, which is a question as a who or what. So his name means who is what God is. Who is what God is, right? Referring to him being all a unique, one of a kind. There's no one like him, right? Well, check this out. Mishael was renamed to Meshach. This Babylonian name is as Babylonian in nature, and his name may mean what is who Aku is. Oh, that's pretty bold. As a reminder to Mishael and those who called him by this, it would mean the moon god Aku, and Marduk was now his god in Babylon, right? Because when you conquer a king and a kingdom, you take on their gods. That's just what you do, right? And Azariah. Azariah comes from two Hebrew words, Yah and Azar, which means the Lord has helped, or the Lord is his helper. His name, Azariah, was renamed to Abed-Nego. His name is Aramaic in origin and may mean the servant of Nebo. Nebo is the scribe of Marduk. Okay? And he's also responsible for vegetation. Okay? There's a lot going on here. There is a lot of history, a lot of culture in 7 verses, right? Squeezing out all of this. This is important for us to understand. It establishes that Judah has been conquered, and 2 actions underscore this. Taking the effects from the temple of God and putting them in that temple, and changing the name of the sons of Israel, the Jews, to reflect the false gods of Babylon. Remember, I told you that this is about God taking it to the false deities of Babylon. He sets this up in this chapter. Okay. However, we read so far that out of all the people who were chosen to stand in service to the king, the historical account focuses on these, I put 3, but it's actually 4 Israelites. It doesn't mean that other people weren't chosen, but these individuals are of great focus and attention. This section underscores the specific account of Daniel. We have a specific time period in verse 1, the specific tribe in verse 1, the specific area or region, Jerusalem, mentioned in verse 1, specific kings, Jehoiakim and Nebuchadnezzar. We have the specific activity of Nebuchadnezzar, wanting the best of the best to serve in his court. We have a specific servant who works with these individuals, who was known as Ashpenaz. We have specific groups, noblemen, family sons, and the sons of Israel, or the Jews in this case. We have specific characteristics and qualities that Nebuchadnezzar is looking for and wants them to be trained in. We have specific orders and times from the king. They are supposed to be trained for 3 years. 3 years. We have specific Jewish men. That is 4. And we have the specific names and their name changes. That's a lot of information. right? And this greases the skids for what takes place in the entire book, right? That will conclude chapter 1, part 1. We will continue to examine chapter 1, part 2, Lord willing, next week. Let's pray. Lord, what a passage. From 7 verses, there is so much information packed into these verses that tells us a lot about what the setup is and how you will preserve your people. You have a plan and a purpose for them. And it is seen throughout, even in these first 7 verses. The fact that, yes, Israel is out of the land, but yet your promises of caring for them and preserving them still remains. Thank you again for reminding us that you are indeed judge, that you are merciful and gracious, and that no one is like you. We thank you so much, for it's in your son's name. Amen.